Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, faith fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue.
San Francisco, the school board recall election. It's being fueled by backlash to some progressive policies. But more than that, might be a potential warning sign to progressives everywhere. When you have the phrase, even liberal San Francisco parents, well, they're signaling they've hit their limits, then you know you may have a political problem. 3 school board members, including the president, Gabriela Lopez, are up for recall in the solidly Democratic city for pursuing symbolic liberal causes like renaming schools, from people like Dianne Feinstein, as classrooms stayed shut due to pandemic restrictions. The recall effort has the backing of Democratic Mayor London Breed. She had that enough is enough speech on shoplifting a few weeks back. And according to the San Francisco Chronicle, has attracted nearly $2 million in campaign spending. So, folks, parental anger has been a force ever since schools went remote. And the political fallout around this issue has only intensified as we approach the midterms. And it hasn't mattered if it's in blue America or red America.
Okay, well, thank you, Chuck Todd, for your insights on how blue America and red America should exist without teachers. Like, that's really the message we should be pushing out on MSNBC. Okay, guys, let's just take a moment and digest what's happening. And this is San Francisco in a blue state, in a blue city with a blue mayor who is supposed to be, supporting the people who back the Democratic Party, the largest union in the country, the largest public service workers. In this moment when workers are under attack, this is happening. And I think we really need to digest this and register what's happening. I am so grateful that our next guest has been on the front lines of this. She's one of the three members who have been facing the attacks. Commissioner Allison Collins is the former Board of Election Commissioner for the San Francisco Unified School District, recently recalled because what on earth? Okay, Allison, thank you so much for joining us. Just to start with that, and I am so sorry that you've had to go through this. I do want to also note that I find it fascinating that the three people that were being recalled are also, women and people of color. So,
and educators too,
and educators, of course, yes. Yeah. Okay. Where do I even begin with this? First off, how are you doing? Let's start with that.
I'm doing well. I think considering this has been going on for a really long time, and you talk to anybody who served in education at all, right? Teachers right now are burning out like crazy, but school board members across the country have been under unprecedented attack for the last year. So I think anybody who's just, able to persist, and, it's been incredibly difficult to do any real work with all these school board attacks, recalls, and things like that. But I think, this is a volunteer job. This isn't, most of us don't get paid. And you look across the country, most of the folks who volunteer to do this work do it because they love public education and they love, public schools. And so, I don't know what else to say. I'm grateful to have been able to serve during the pandemic, because I think at least in San Francisco, as compared to other parts of the country, we were able to take a lot of steps to keep our communities a lot safer than we're seeing across the nation.
I think it's so important that you said it's a volunteer job because, teachers across this country are really not paid anywhere near a livable wage. My mother was a teacher. I have family members. I'm very close to the teaching community, very good friends of mine who in Arizona were part of the Red State Revolt there. And I have one of my friends in particular, I talked to recently, has two children, and, they can barely pay their rent in Arizona. And they've been forced to move many times, but they're so dedicated to teaching that it's really kind of beautiful to see that kind of dedication from folks who are so invested in making sure that we preserve our basis. I mean, this is the basis of democracy. This is what's going to get us out of whatever mess we're in. So it's really horrifying to see, especially in San Francisco, these type of efforts successful. So I know that you guys have issued a recall report. I want to start with just how it happened. How did this happen? Why San Francisco? And why your school board?
Well, I'll tell you, it's actually happening across the country. And I think I appreciate shows like this where we can really have meaningful conversations. As you know, most of the mainstream media is about sound bites, and a lot of it is funded by PR companies. And what I'm seeing nationally is an attack on education, public education specifically. And so when you look at the larger context, San Francisco is no different than any other part of the country right now. You have an unprecedented number of recalls this year. In 2006 to 2020, there was an average of 23 recalls a year against
Oh my God.
52 school board members. This past year, you had 84 as compared to 23 and against 215 members. So you see a huge spike in recalls nationally. You also see, just all this energy right now with these, the Republican Party last year became the party of parents with, they credited that messaging and that strategy to winning the Glenn Youngkin election. You have also just a rise of recalls related to school reopening and parents, quote, parents coming into schools and, raging against wokeness through anti-CRT policies, as well as, there's also a weaponization of the Stop Asian Hate movement with this, you're seeing Asian American conservative groups fighting against affirmative action.
Right.
So all of those, there's a confluence of things that's been happening nationally, and basically what you see is the Republican Party and right wing. They understand that if they want to take back power, they're going to mess with our right to vote, but they're also going to take back local elections, and school boards are pathways to power. Right.
That's right.
Most people, I'm running because I actually am an educator and I want to stay on the school board. But a lot of folks enter into school boards and, local county offices, and then they move on to higher office. And so this is really a national strategy. And you see it. I mean, they're telling us what their strategy is. You have Steve Bannon has said, we're taking action. And that action we are taking is we are taking over school boards. He said that, right?
Yep.
You have Chris Rufo, who crafted the whole anti-CRT. It's a campaign. It's a messaging campaign. And he said, it's time to clean house in America, remove the attorney general, lay siege on the universities, abolish the teachers unions, and overturn school boards. They are telling us what they're doing. And for some reason, mainstream media wants to kind of approach this as a whole bunch of individual issues, like San Francisco.
That's right.
All the woke people. And then you have Florida, you have parents that are mad about CRT. Obviously San Francisco, you're not going to sell a strategy of anti-CRT in San Francisco. But what you did have was you had parents upset about school renaming, or you have parents that are mad that we desegregated one of our elite high schools, right? Those are issues that involve race and segregation and these kind of culture war issues. But it's really just a messaging campaign. You have some really standard, messaging and arguments, but then they just get tailored for a local market. And so in San Francisco, we don't have any successful Republican candidates. So you have moderates and you have Democrats. In other cities, they would be probably running as Republicans, and so that's why I think it is. We can disagree as Democrats as well, but I think it is very disingenuous to say that this is, Democrats versus progressives when you have $500,000 being funded by actual Republicans, like $2 million for a recall election. And many of the donors are Republican donors. David Sachs fundraised for DeSantis in San Francisco. He was one of the primary donors. We have William Obendorf, who's also a Republican billionaire. So, there were parents, Democratic parents, who also voted for the recall. But I think largely this recall got its juice from neoliberals, Republicans and libertarians, and corporate interests. I mean, we even had Visa and the Realtors Association, right? The charter associations. Those are the organizations that were really fueling this effort, that got it on the ballot. And just like across the country, right, they weaponized parental frustration and anger about schools being closed, and also weaponized some of the old school anger about change. And so this is just another take back kind of America movement, but now we're seeing it's in San Francisco. And but utilizing the same tactics, really same messaging strategies that we're seeing nationally.
I mean, it's so fascinating, and I say this a lot on the show because I want people to understand, as you're doing, the teachers union is it's obviously teachers and educators have been on the front lines during this pandemic and have dealt with so many different issues along the way. Not to mention these smear campaigns and actual political campaigns with a lot of money to take out educators for volunteer positions, as you said, but. The largest public sector union, the largest public sector workers in this country are educators. The largest donors to the Democratic Party are the teachers' unions. If we don't think this is a Republican play to weaken Democrats, and I think we need to say this out loud more, because London Breed or anybody, any Democrat who runs with the D next to them and is in office and supports these efforts, should, frankly, in my opinion, be exposed for not being in line with the Democratic Party. You want to weaken your party, you weaken teachers. And I think the word is out about charters at this point. So it doesn't look like this is a charter campaign, but obviously there's a lot of charter money going into this.
Where it's going, honestly, is vouchers. So
okay.
Charters are dead, and you're seeing a lot of activity with vouchers. And, with the pandemic, you saw a rise in homeschooling, which also that's privatized, unregulated education, right?
Yeah.
So you talk to anybody who follows charters, they were seeing this too. Even when we closed down and all these micro schools came out, those are also, it's basically a way to privatize public education dollars. Moving them out of local oversight. And this is where it comes to democracy, right? I'm an unelected official. If you don't like me, you can vote me out. But charters, there's no real oversight unless,
right.
Every few years you go in and you say, okay, I'd like to renew my charter. But on a day-to-day basis, we have meetings twice a month. Parents show up and they voice their concerns. It's very easy to see, your local government in action when you go to vouchers or you go to charter schools. You're basically allowing a private organization, even if it's a nonprofit, it's a private organization to manage those dollars and run public education. And so, that's, so it's you've got, I think, really a confluence of interests. You've got maybe more conservative voters who are unhappy that schools are embracing anti-racist education, pro-LGBTQ education. They don't like that. You have conservative, just, Republican or right-wing interests that see an opportunity to take political power through mobilizing parent anger. And then you also just have opportunists, people who can make money off the system. And I think that's why you see charters. And then you also see the tech sector. There's a lot of opportunity, for them as well, as we've gone online, for them to make money. And, so you have kind of, like I said, a confluence of interests coming together and seeing an opportunity during a time of really great distress for our country and based on the pandemic.
I'm happy you mentioned Steve Bannon, because I caught an article in the New York Times I've referenced quite a bit on the show in December, where the Proud Boys proudly announced that they are running for city councils and school boards now. Proud Boys, who I'm going to guess are not educators,
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. I'm just going to I help us find one. I'm very curious if there's one out there. But I mean, this is really the framing that I think is so important for people to understand. You can have educators on these school boards who understand their communities, who understand the system, who understand the children, or you could have Proud Boys. And, I just don't understand how someone like a London Breed could so aggressively champion this. And have you had any sort of communication with her? What is the teachers union, whether it's local or national?
The teachers union is a big issue because when you look at California, we educate the most children in the country as a state. And then you look at California Teachers Association as the largest union in our state. So if you want to run for governor, you want CTA backing you. And so it is a statewide issue, and San Francisco definitely is a leader, right? When it comes to districts in our state, we're one of the larger districts, and we have influence on things like that. And so, there are, like I said, we don't have traditional, like in other states, you have Democrats and Republicans. We have moderates and progressives, but and Mayor Breed is associated with moderate kind of political party, and then we have progressive. So we have those similar kinds of battles in our city around who's in charge of City Hall and who makes decisions, and so there are not on a national scale but locally very important kind of power plays happening with the school board, because me and my colleague were considered progressive, and so those play out on a local level. But I also think, our elections cost so much money. And if you want, I ran my election for $40,000. It was grassroots, similar to my colleagues. In the last 4 elections, $1 million was raised by school board candidates in total. And so to have a recall where they're able to raise $2 million just for a recall election, right? That's a real signal to, and some of the people behind the recall were failed Board of Ed candidates who raised more money. And so I think this is just really a way of kind of folks are flexing their power politically and showing that they can, if they can't run in a regular election, they're going to use recalls. I think it sets a very dangerous precedent in California. But they can flex their power and say, well, we don't have to run in a regular election. We can do a recall election, which is a lower voter turnout election, and we can get candidates that weren't able to get elected in a regular election on there because we have less people of color voting and less working class folks, and so I think that's where I think it gets really troubling, is that it sets us up. In California, at least, you can recall anybody you don't like in an off-season election with enough cash.
You brought up such an interesting point, and I want to reiterate it and maybe ask you the numbers if you have them. So this is not a normal election. So when you don't have it, it's low turnout in general happens in California, unfortunately, and especially when it's not a presidential year. But then municipal elections in particular are low turnout, and pretty much everywhere in the country at this point. So it's extremely low turnout. But in terms of how low,
so in a regular election, 75% of San Franciscans normally vote for a school board election.
That's actually great, by the way. That's a very great number compared to Los Angeles, which is like 9%, I think.
We're a very political city, and it's a small city in a sense. So it's kind of like a big town. When you look at LA or New York, you have millions of people. San Francisco has about 800,000, maybe 900,000 people, but you get about 75% of the electorate voting. In the recall, you had 25%. So you have a much smaller percentage. And then the folks who vote are a different demographic than you would get normally. But additionally, I think what's also important is in a regular election, when I was raising money, you're asking everyone to help you get money. $500 is the max people can donate. But because this was a proposition, it wasn't an election.
Oh, interesting.
So because it's a proposition, there's no limit. So that's why you have somebody like Arthur Rock can drop $100,000 at a pop. And ultimately, he ended up donating $500,000. That's a quarter of this whole budget.
Wow.
You can't, 500,000 compared to 500, right? So that's one person can have basically, buy an election. And additionally, I think there's a win-win for them, because even if they lose, right, they've been able to amass a large amount of money, and they can use it however they like. So if I'm running for me. If I win or lose, that money I can kind of, any leftover money, I can spend it here or there. But this is an opportunity for them to raise wildly, great amounts of money. Even if they had lost this election, they can take that money and then funnel it into candidates that they want to run in the fall. And so I think the reason this is so important, and I'm really glad that you're doing the show, is this is not just about San Francisco. This is what's happening nationally. And I think that's why you have former Vice President Mike Pence kind of crowing about, yes, this is a repudiation of wokeness by the Democrats, and kind of, we're coming to get you. This is a national model that I think the Republicans are going to want to play out nationally. And through these irregular kind of elections, and through, in California, this ability to run a proposition and establish, basically they're getting voter lists together.
Yes, exactly.
A whole bunch of fundraising.
It's an organizing moment for them.
Right. And so even if they had lost, they would have kind of been ahead for the November election. And I think we're going to see this between now and November, all across the country. We're going to see, people sharing this as a strategy for taking over kind of local political power. And then that is a play for 2024. So, that's very clear to me. Like, if you've got Bannon and the Republican Party saying this is our strategy, they're playing it out, and and they've invested in this model. If they can do it in San Francisco, then they can do it anywhere.
What I don't understand, though, is California. Yes, it used to be a Republican state, and there, are parts of California that are definitely more conservative. It is a lot of money and effort to put into California, in which, unless I'm not seeing something, and they're depending on low turnout in other parts. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, California as a state, we educate most of the children here. So when you want to look at school boards, and like CTA is the largest union, so if you want to really disrupt, and also, just looking at San Francisco, other than Los Angeles and Oakland, we've been able to really keep charters out of our district. And I'm one of the largest kind of proponents, so I'm a great target, but I think as a city, it's a smaller city, and San Francisco doesn't like big box retailers, so you just say, look, Walmart pays for charters, and then people who don't even know anything about public schools will oppose them. They're not popular. But if you can get charters into San Francisco, I think we are, a real trophy. And so I think that is why you would want to invest. If you've got somebody like Charlie Kirk, regularly talks about San Francisco, right? And, we're on, the Tucker Carlson show as, regularly as when we advance progressive policies. So to have this as a win is a feather in their cap. And I do think they've been really, really honing, their strategies. And I think, you've got the on the ground strategy, but you also have tech, and you have a lot of disinformation. Twitter, we have Facebook. And what I've also noticed in this campaign is a really just intense amount of disinformation online that it's always existed, but a real explosion of
weaponized,
targeted harassment. And what is Asha Rangappa? She's a former FBI agent. She talks about domestic information warfare. And I think we're used to thinking of it on a national level. I think there are right-wing folks who are figuring out how to weaponize information. And if you're in a small, San Francisco is maybe a big city, but it's small enough of a community that you can really disrupt how people get information. And that was, I think, one of the most frustrating things about this was just the amount of disinformation. With this whole idea that we didn't open schools because we were so focused on renaming schools is just misinformation. We weren't talking about it. But if you repeat something enough and enough, then people think, gosh, that seems really silly. And I'm like, it is silly. We didn't do it, but it doesn't matter. And so
yes, exactly.
When you have that kind of reach, and you have the ability to, weaponize Twitter, in a sense, you have trolls and bots attacking people, shutting people down, as well as just dumping a whole bunch of misinformation. It just overwhelms the system. And especially during a pandemic, when people are not out talking to each other and they're relying on Twitter and Facebook and these social media spaces, those are our public spaces where we share information. And so that's something I also is going to be expanding, I think, in all types of races locally. And people are not aware of how much misinformation is out there and how much it's weaponized and how much, how many bots and trolls and just targeted inorganic campaigns are, we're not, it's not just Russia. It's also.
Oh, no. We are definitely used to this on our show. We literally I started off the show saying I said, I'm very tired. I didn't sleep. You know why? Because I woke up to 1,500 bots attacking me over, challenging somebody. I mean, it is warfare, and it's, and I said, Congress needs to do something about this. And of course, they started calling me, it was like a McCarthyist attack. I'm like, no, that's actually not what I'm talking about. Congress has a job, and it'd be great if our government operated, unless you like being in a completely, unregulated free market space. If that's the case, maybe you're not on the left. But these are my opinions on this.
It's really important. And I just want to add, it wasn't just me getting targeted. Parents that would comment or share were personally getting targeted and doxxed by some of these campaigns. And so it becomes really unsafe, not just for me, but for student leaders who are speaking out about things. And so that really shuts down democratic dialogue, and it keeps people, there were a lot of parents who were scared about reopening, I read policies to help keep our schools safe. And I said, will you be comfortable with me sharing that you helped me with this? And they all declined because they were getting targeted. And so it really isn't impacting our democracy.
That's right. It's there to silence people. It's there to silence dissent. And these are also spaces, I have to reiterate this over and over again. These are spaces, these algorithms are not just designed by white men, but they are feeding they're promoting and pushing white male perspectives. And, when you don't have other perspectives in a room, it's the legacy of Gamergate. We saw what happened with Gamergate. It's now playing out in real life, and in whether it's YouTube politics or on in real impactful campaigns involving school boards. I mean, this is very, very real. And I will never shut up about this. And I am really happy that you're not either. I've had a ton of stuff thrown at me. I imagine you are. And there's many times when I'm frustrated and I feel unsafe. I had to move apartments. I'm just going to be real. And I'm sure you're in these situations too. And it's important for us to talk about it so that people who might be white males are aware of it and can use their privilege in this space to call it out, because it's, I often feel like if people don't feel it, they don't see it, they don't think it's real.
Yeah.
But this is a volunteer position for you, and you've really put yourself out there, and you've taken the worst types of attacks from the worst types of people. My only question I have left is before we tie this up, and we'd love to have you back on, by the way. This is such a big conversation that I feel like we barely even touched it. Is there an effort to reform the recall effort? I mean, we've seen how it's been used as a weapon, and I imagine there's no elected official in California isn't worried about being recalled themselves right now.
Well, locally, I think immediately we have a board of supervisors. They started discussing policies to make it more difficult to file recalls. I think it's really great that they realize, oh, I'm next, and then they decided to implement this new policy. But I think California is unique it may be different in different states, but I think the big picture is that as I said before, we have this national strategy of really disenfranchising voters, and folks, are using whatever tactics they have available to them locally. And so we have redistricting, we have, people's voter rights being restricted. And they're also looking for ways that they can either force resignations via information attacks, which is what happened to me. They tried to get me to resign. And then, but additionally, you see it in Boston. There were several school board members that were forced to resign based on claims that they were anti-Asian or anti-white for integrating Boston Latin. You see this in Loudoun County, Virginia, around Thomas Jefferson High School, all across the country with anti-CRT, there's a lot of these. And so there's a kind of a direct link between, if they can't do it policy-wise, they're doing it through propaganda and these information attacks. So whatever works.
It would be really amazing if there were organizations out there, and I know that they exist, that could do briefings for press on like the strategies, because I do think a lot of people fall for this. I think some people just don't care and they have their own agendas and they're going to do what they need to do because they're on networks that are funded by a lot of the folks. But there are definitely some folks who fall for it, and I think media literacy around how. Media literacy for the media, not for the viewers, on how this misinformation is being weaponized and these tactics are being used and who's behind them, and not to fall for a CRT because they can come up with any. I don't even give it power, because the more you give it power, the more it becomes a thing. And it's just like attacks on teachers' unions because they don't want the Democrats to be in power. I mean, that's really what this is about. They want power.
Organized labor.
That's exactly.
You have organized labor in San Francisco. They team up. They work with other labor unions. They increase that power because they work in solidarity with one another. And so you have companies like Uber, or other companies. They don't want labor to be powerful in any way, because they all, labor unions like working together because they organize. So definitely. There's a lot to talk about, and I do
Allison,
really you and just being able to talk, but also just all the other content that you provide is really, really wonderful.
You're very kind. Commissioner Allison Collins, I'm so grateful for your work and your courage and putting yourself out there and speaking. And I hope more folks have you on to discuss what's happening, and, just grateful.
I wanted to make one plug. I am going to be launching a podcast where I can have these types of conversations with the folks that are educating me. So I talked with Dr. Grayson. He started the racial violence syllabus after Heather Heyer murder. But I'm also talking to folks from Zin Education Project who are pushing to fight back and educate. We're working with other educators to mobilize and educate folks. So I encourage people to check me out on my socials. And also I'll be launching that podcast shortly, and it's called Just Talks. And I'm really excited to be able to do this type of thing with folks that are like on the ground, pushing back on these attacks on education justice.
I love when activists and folks who are on the ground get involved in media, because there's a whole lot of people with hot takes and who read a lot of theory, which is important. Not a lot of folks who've actually lived it and can smell things before. It's true though. I mean, it's a muscle, and when you've been an organizer and you've been on the front lines, you can smell things before maybe the general public sees them coming. So it's really important to have your voice out there. So thank you, Allison, for joining us. Good luck. I hope you run again for something else very soon. It would be really amazing. Really want to see you in office, because we need more teachers in office, and you're fierce as F. So thank you.
Thank you for your time.
If you're not already, please make sure to support us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. That is how we fund the show. Make sure to like and subscribe. We got to get those likes and subscribes up. We've put a lot of thought and effort on what it means to do this show and to be in solidarity with other hosts and what kind of guests we have on. But we're only able to do that because we have patrons. Have a lot of issues with my health, everything from sleeping to aches and pains. Oh boy. 2 nights ago, I oh God, I like, this is like my ailment section of the show. Like, what ailments are you dealing with? Do not, if you're under the age of 35, get ready. That's all I gotta say. Even if you're healthy, just get ready. Because the other night I had a great night's sleep, which doesn't happen often. I slept, I have this monitor right here and I check my sleep and it'll tell me like, oh, you got up for 15 minutes to go to the bathroom or whatever. So 2 nights ago, I slept the entire night through, which means I didn't toss and turn, which means I woke up and my neck was all screwed up, and it still is. So I took the CBD, Sunset Lake CBD, to help me sleep, which is amazing. They have this tincture where it has melatonin in that helps you fall asleep, and the CBD helped me stay asleep. And boy, did it. But then I woke up in the morning and I had to take another form of CBD because I had the aches and pains. So, but thank God for CBD, because what I used to do is I would do the other stuff, and then it was really hard for me to function all day. Sunset Lake CBD is a farmer-owned company that ships craft CBD products directly from their farm in Vermont to your door. They have all types of products: gummies, tinctures, salves, coffee, which our friend Dorsey and my mom, they both like it a lot. They use it because, it wakes you up, but it doesn't make you jittery. It's all designed to help you stress, aches, pains, keep you calm. They are an amazing company. They pay their workers, the minimum wage is $15 an hour, and the employees own the majority of the company. They also support shows like our show, The Majority Report, David Pakman Show. And when you're supporting them, you're supporting sustainable agriculture that enhances rural economies and creates meaningful employment in their community. Their farm is amazing. It's a former Ben and Jerry's farm in Vermont. I really want to go check it out. I think I might go there someday. I've been talking about that for a while. But if you go to their website right now, sunsetlakecbd.com, type in Nomi and you will get 20% off of your order. Sunsetlakecbd.com. Type in NOMI and you will get 20% off of your order. Go check it out. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Allison Collins is back. Allison is the former Board of Education Commissioner for the San Francisco Unified School District and recently went through a recall, which is really about something a little bit more. Allison, it's so great to see you again.
Nice to see you too. I really appreciate the opportunity to come back.
So Allison, I loved our conversation before. Just for folks, can you remind us what happened to you? And then we can get into like what's really behind it.
Yeah, well, I guess this past month, there was a vote in San Francisco. I'm one of 7 school board members, or was one of 7 school board members, and 3 of us were recently recalled in an unprecedented recall election in San Francisco. As a result, there's the media, or the I guess the recallers were charging that we didn't open schools soon enough, and there were concerns around, fiscal responsibility. There's a lot of different things that were raised as concerns, but I think primarily COVID, not opening schools soon enough. And one other thing that was really unprecedented is that they were able to raise about $2 million to initiate the recall, and it was successful. But as I mentioned in a previous, when we talked earlier, this is actually something that's happening nationally, and we're seeing an unprecedented number of recalls happening across the country. But as a progressive, in quotes, city, it was pretty unique, to see this happen in a city that supposedly is, really progressive.
Um, why did they choose you three on the board?
Um, well, I mean, there's a lot of theories. Three of us are people of color. Let's just start there. And you have me and former President Gabriela Lopez, Black and Latinx women, also very progressive and talk a lot about race and white supremacy culture. So, it's not just about skin color, it's also about folks who are willing to address racism and systemic racism, actually not just photo ops, but actually we were changing systems in the district. So President Lopez authored a resolution to actually focus on Latinx community members. I and her collaborated on a resolution to open up enrollment in one of our most segregated elite high schools, where there's a lot of anti-Black racism, and Black students had protested. We actually worked with those students, a Black and Latinx student representative, to address this kind of decades old issue in our city around a high school. And that also in San Francisco specifically, it's kind of a third rail. You don't mess with selective enrollment at some of these high schools. But as I said, I'm seeing this across the country. You see this at Boston Latin. In Boston, there was another controversy around school commissioners there, or around opening up enrollment there. But really all these is about really changing systems, really folks who are changing the system. And I think a lot of us ran when Trump was in office. You saw a wave of new people running for office that had not been regular politicians. We were, people of color, progressive folks, and people who, working class folks, labor, oriented folks running for office. And what we're seeing now nationally is a backlash of, the right wing is reorganizing itself and trying to remove people from office, remove progressive education policies as well, as you're seeing with anti-CRT and anti-gay and transgender, policies. They're trying to, push it back and erase the progress that we've made.
It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, and obviously every state is different, but California has this unique recall system. But it seems to me that they're kind of preying on these laws, these democratic laws in place, through low turnout elections in which they can, through $2 million, basically turn out fearmonger folks into showing up for something that, if say it was in a presidential year, it wouldn't have passed. Is that correct?
It's hard to say, honestly, but for sure when I ran, and President Lopez ran, we did not, and also our colleague, Commissioner Maliga ran, we all ran really community-based campaigns. And that's kind of how San Francisco runs. It is a city. We're like an international city, and yet we're not very large. There's only around 800,000 people. So when you compare us to Chicago or New York, we're small. And so people can run, it's a citywide campaign, but you can do it for about $40,000. And it's, so it's kind of a mix.
Wow.
To run a citywide campaign. But so just, the amount of money though that flowed into this campaign was unprecedented. $2 million for one election, when in the past 4 years, all of us collectively combined, anybody who ran in the last 4 years raised maybe $1 million. So what you saw was just a flooding of the airwaves, mailers. And we're seeing this now with Chesa Boudin. He's our district attorney. And I do believe it's interesting. There's a lot of crossover. I also want to say the money isn't just the mailers. It's also it's like a ground war. They hired a Texas-based company to come in and gather signatures. And in that process, what you're doing, if you know anything about community organizing, and I'm a community organizer, you get a petition going. Part of that is engaging the community in conversation and getting their name and contact information, so you can start, sharing information about what you want to talk about. And so they went out and across the city, and it was you would see recall Chesa Boudin and recall the school board kind of at the same table. And the messaging in both cases, it's okay if you don't agree, but some of the information was just flat out untrue.
Yeah.
But you have these one-on-one folks who are literally paid to collect signatures, not from San Francisco, from Texas, right? They don't know anything about our school board. They're not parents. There were volunteers, but when you have that kind of money to pay people to gather signatures citywide, you're also you're able to drive a narrative. And then, we just didn't have the capacity to respond to that because we were doing our jobs, and as I said before, we're volunteers. So, my colleague, President Lopez, she works at University of San Francisco helping to, mentor new teachers, right? My other colleague, Commissioner Maliga, is a full-time social worker. So we don't have staff, we don't have PR firms. And what they were able to set up in San Francisco is several different nonprofits, which based on new laws in California, you can't even look up who's giving them money, right?
Wow.
You had several different parent reopener groups, like where people were getting full salaries. And then they're working with people who were paid political consultants that have expertise working with like the mayor, state legislators. They know how to run political campaigns, being paid. And so also this $2 million, I think people need to understand, it becomes its own economy, right?
Right.
So people are kind of creating their own jobs, to run campaigns, and they're getting paid quite well, to do it. I was paid a $500 stipend every month, and I got health insurance, whereas you had one of the former failed school board candidates was running a campaign and getting, I think, $100,000 to run a signature gathering campaigns. So it's just, there's no way to.
And of course the money is not, it's mostly coming from outside interests that are exercising these campaigns in different forms and with different messaging all over the country. What is their end game? Is it like just to annihilate teachers unions and privatize schools? Is that kind of what they're?
Well, I think
you're using culture war, but it seems like it's really about something else.
Yeah. Well, San Francisco, I think what's interesting is you have a national kind of a context, right? Like, I don't think any of this would have happened without COVID, which is hugely destabilizing, right? I don't think any of this would have happened if there wasn't a national kind of, I spoke with Dr. Grayson, and he immediately made the connection between the recall effort here, the recalls across the country, and the January 6th insurrection, right? There's this take back our country kind of energy happening. But then on a local level, you see nationally, every town has their own issues, right? And in San Francisco, we have specific battles that are going on, and power war, power plays between different political factions, people who want to see more development or less development or more, tenant rights, or, those battles are constantly going on in City Hall. And so the school board is a conduit. People get on the school board to then run for higher office. And so
right.
Who's on the school board? Now we have a mayoral appointed school board, predominantly mayoral appointed school board in San Francisco, because two of our previous, we've had other candidates who were appointed. And so out of 7 members now, 4 of those members have been appointed by the mayor.
Wow.
So then that gives the mayor, and you look at other cities, you look at Bloomberg, she was a mayor who supported Bloomberg in the election. You look at Bloomberg mayors, you've got New York is going through, talk to some New York teachers, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. And there's in that, they don't vote for school board members in New York.
No, we don't.
In Boston, they don't vote for school board members. They are appointed by the mayor. In Chicago, they just won kind of the right to vote for their, representatives, representation over the school board. So there's been a move in San Francisco. The mayor has been very clear that she wants to have a say in how we do things. And so in effect, and there are people who are saying they want that too. There tend to be more conservative, voices in our city, but whether she was progressive or moderate, there's this idea of mayoral control, and
Mm-hmm.
Who dictates who's on the school board is also kind of dictating who's going to potentially get into city hall and be a city supervisor. And then, that dictates how our city sets its budget around policing. And then this is where it all, and this relates to the teachers union and all the unions in our city, right? Because unions know how to organize and they work in solidarity. So the teachers union works with, other unions in our city, right? And so that's where it becomes part of for our city, a larger kind of power play about, and funding for police is a big deal. And that's why Chesa Boudin, our city attorney, is now also under fire for trying to, tackle some of the criminal justice issues. And he's very progressive. And so folks that are pro Police Officers Association, don't like him. And so that's, but it's the same. There's a lot of crossover. There are some differences, but there is a lot of crossover in our city between that, the criminal justice, police support, and then also development interests.
Right.
And so that's why we see the Realtors Association dropped a lot of money, the Chamber of Commerce, which has a lot of Republican members. You can people say there aren't any Republicans in San Francisco. That's not true.
Right.
But, people aren't as loud about it. And so,
which that's an interesting point, because I am thinking, San Francisco is a very wealthy city. The inequality is it's right there with New York. You have a housing crisis in San Francisco as well. You have a homeless crisis that's been going on for a long time, as we do in New York as well. But there's this other aspect that I guess we have it in New York through like a little bit of tech and a lot of finance, but there's the tech culture that really it's like in your face in San Francisco. And that's, there's a lot of libertarianism that's running through. So how much does like when you're canvassing in supposedly very progressive San Francisco, are you like hit in the face with this libertarian kind of mindset through tech culture?
I think that's a really good question. And it's not in the streets, not in the communities, but online and in the media. And so it's really, San Francisco's changing too.
Yeah.
Because of gentrification. I moved here over 20 years ago because it reminded me of growing up in a part of LA that was very diverse and economically diverse. And just like where I grew up doesn't look the same.
Right.
It doesn't look the same here. And parts of, we had a very, more representation for, we have maybe 3% Black folks. When I moved here, it was like 12%. And in our school district, it was 25%. Latinx community is being pushed out now. So it's hard to say, our city is getting whiter and more affluent in some respects. And at the same time, our school district isn't, right? So we are focused, as a school board member, you're focused on the children that you serve. 70% of white families put their kids in private school. So just like, there's white flight, and it happened when the district integrated schools, there was white flight like there was everywhere, and it stayed. So there's a disconnect between, you had a lot of maybe people who weren't parents or private school parents voting. A school board election is just anybody votes. So, but our goal was to really be listening to constituents. So me and Gabriella and Fogo, all of us were very focused on that. It's hard to say, I know my constituents, I know public school families, I know educators. It's hard to say. I do think that there's definitely an overrepresentation of tech interests and these kind of, folks who are coming to San Francisco, new to the city. A lot of the things you're seeing in New York. They move to the Mission because it's cool, and get a condo, and then complain about the noise. Just like we're seeing it in Oakland nationally. Yeah. And so, to some degree, I think that's where the COVID piece comes in. You have parents who maybe weren't involved in our public education system. All of a sudden, meetings are online. They're hearing we're changing names of some schools that were named after slave owners, or we're doing anti-racist curriculum. And they're thinking, they're maybe coming from places that were, they're not as invested and involved in the day-to-day, Yeah. And so I think that's happening nationally as well. People are like, what? You're teaching what? You're teaching about, it's okay to be trans. I don't like that. And so then that's where you see this kind of backlash of folks who maybe previously weren't as involved are getting more involved. But their voices are maybe louder disproportionately than they should be based on representation. If that
Maybe
makes
they should turn off Fox News and maybe Facebook and channel their anger not towards their teachers, but and maybe not towards like Congress, like literally storming it, but maybe the companies that are really exacerbating these issues.
I do want to say something too about Facebook. What I've learned is I'm a very social mom. I started blogging as a mom blogger, educator. And it was a way for me to build community and share information. Right. What I'm seeing now is that Facebook is becoming a place to basically radicalize parents, because there were parent groups that started forming. And if you didn't agree, or if you said, hey, this sounds anti-union, I like teachers, parents would tell me they'd get kicked out of the group. And so you have a lot of these echo chambers happening, right, where parents are organizing. And then you have WeChat is a place where the Asian American community, and if you know anybody who knows about propaganda and this radicalization that's happening, within that community, there is a similar element of that. And then on Twitter, you have Twitter bots. As there's a lot of fake people online, and there's targeted harassment. And so, people get on block lists and they get ratioed and all these things that, I don't even understand. Most folks think that they're engaging in an authentic space. Right. And with the pandemic, we rely on these spaces. There are public meeting spaces. We're not going to the park, talking to our neighbors. We're online. And I think that also is a whole other aspect, I think, of this.
And what it does is it serves the purpose of silencing dissent. And oftentimes those who really need to have a voice are people of color, women, our sisters and brothers in marginalized communities across the board. And it's number one, it's aggressively going after people so that they don't feel comfortable speaking up. But then it's also shifting the algorithm so that they're not even showing up in a feed. And on top of it, when you're seeing so much misinformation, it places doubt in people's minds. I mean, just a quick little story. Like yesterday, I showed up on a Reddit site. Someone sent it to me and I was like, oh my God. And people were like, yeah, Nomi's a lib, Nomi's lib. I'm like, what, when if I showed you I'm a lib? Like it was, but then I realized it's just because people say it enough that they start to think, oh yeah, well, she's just like, she just thinks this way or whatever. And it can be, some of it was like real misinformation. And these are good, these were people who were real, who just were seeing the misinformation spread enough that it was doubt placed in their minds. So I know I've seen it online with you. And I think it's really important that you keep, if you're able to keep speaking out about it, because that's the only way to counter the messaging, I guess, at this point.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I just recently spoke with Isaac Kamala, and I do think he would be a great person for you to have on the show. He's done research on these information attacks that happened at the college level. And what you start to see when you learn about something, then all of a sudden you see it everywhere. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And he really has drilled down into these attacks on professors in college campuses. And the whole infrastructure that existed around them and still exists to basically get them out of the universities, and then also to promote, ideas that really don't have merit. But it's that is now happening at all levels. And so, you're aware of this as far as just mainstream media. What gets promoted, what doesn't get promoted. How do stories get chosen? And then some things are not even stories, really, right? But there's enough juice behind them, or You know,
Hunter Biden.
or there
I wasted my morning yesterday talking about that on the news, being like, really? Like,
yeah, and
that's what we're
we
talking
all
about.
have to talk about it, right? And then it's a story.
Yeah.
And so that is happening. And there's this pipeline too of get trolls to talk about it,
That's right.
you know, start a fake blog site, you know, pretend to
Yep.
be real, and then eventually it's in the Chronicle. So I think what you're doing is so important. This is so important because people can get actual information, right? You don't have to agree, but it's there's so much false information out there, and it really is impacting. I saw, you know, don't agree with me if you don't agree that we should change the name of a high school. Like, let's talk about it. But there's some stuff there was stuff floating around. It was just, and it prevented me from actually serving families and
Yeah.
doing my job, right? And so that is a real disservice to just how our system works, and then also to our democracy. And so anyway, I just really appreciate this show. And also I do think we need to get more media savvy and media literate so we can see the red flags, because
100%.
now that I see it, I knew, okay, if it's on the news, it's not always true, but the level of intentional kind of disinformation and manipulation that's going on in around electoral politics and policy in our country is just off the charts.
It's beyond, like, Congress needs to have hearings. I mean, this is it's so deep, it's so entrenched. Yeah, where we could do a whole other show on that one. Allison, thank you again for joining us. Just, we're really grateful for all the work that you've done and have been doing, and I hope we can keep this conversation going. And we're here with you. We support you.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you so much for your support. And I just want to say too, I know there's just hearing you speak about the union and teachers themselves is right. I talk to them all the time. It is so hard right now, and just really appreciate your support to educators,
Thank you.
and just I'm really grateful.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you know, but we are on all of the podcast platforms. David figured it out. I didn't really know that we weren't on all of them, but thank goodness we have a great team that understands these things, because I just read the news like crazy and then talk about it. That's pretty much my role. Other than that, I am clueless. But you can go check out the Nomiki Show on all the podcast platforms. You pick them. You can listen to the same show on every single platform if you want. You can rate them on every. I don't know. People do a lot of crazy things. But if you are really into our show and you are able to do so, please join us on patreon.com/the Nomiki Show. It is so important that we have a patron system community, because that's what keeps the show going. When the algorithms play games, we have been all over the place with the algorithms over the last 2 years, as I'm sure you've seen. But if you join us on patreon.com, starting at $5 a month, there are all different levels. If you have been a patron and you can no longer afford to, or you want to go down a level, or you want to take a break, let us know. Email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We will work something out, because the patron family is so important to us. And if you can afford to sponsor another patron, you're an incredible person. But really, this is independent media. I don't think folks understand how much work goes into this, or maybe you do, and just how hard it is to keep going. I mean, especially with the way that the algorithms are working, newer shows are not hitting. They're just not hitting the mark the way that they did a few years ago. It was a little bit easier to start up a new show, but we've been doing it because of our patrons. It's kept us going. And if you are a patron and you listen to us on Patreon, which you probably are right now, make sure to throw in your questions, because we're going to be doing a Q&A coming up. I'm going to be answering all your questions. Just as long as it's not like some sort of like whatever the latest like right-wing Russia people are doing. I'm just kidding. Every time I open up my phone, I'm like, oh, more bots. There we go. Oh, 2 followers. Thanks. I'm just kidding. I know you all are fully aware of what's going on. Always grateful to everybody for tuning in, for listening, and joining us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show.
Here's where it gets a little sensitive, because I've been coached a little bit, but I do want to talk about something pretty serious. We can't ignore what is happening in the country as it relates to companies throughout the country being assaulted in many ways by the threat of unionization.
I mean, it's obvious that like Starbucks hasn't listened through all these years. You know, I mean, it's not a new thing that came up that we wanted more labor, we wanted more pay.
And now we have a group, an organization trying to take our people.
Pay us what we're worth and give us the labor needed to execute your demands. We are overworked, we are underpaid. There is a big change coming in this company, and, you know, just support us in what we want. The communication between higher ups and our stores started to become non-existent. We noticed that stores that were being built were not as well put together as older stores. They introduced so many new things like components to drinks, mobile orders, deliveries. We were never given the tools to make that happen properly. We were doing all this extra work and we weren't getting paid for what we think that we were worth. The fact that they're cutting hours in stores nationwide, the fact that they are writing people up. They fired 7 people in Tennessee, the Memphis 7. It's a tactic that Starbucks has used before. I feel like they're flexing their muscles this time, but it's not gonna work. They're not gonna win this time. There's so much power behind our movement, or Buffalo's movement, that they're not gonna be able to do what they did before, and it's not gonna work.
Well, on Tuesday, we saw the original Starbucks store in Seattle unanimously vote in favor of union representation. In fact, union votes around the country, plus other factors, like Starbucks' recent guidance, have been hitting the stock. It is down more than 25% year to date.
All right, welcome back. It's Femme Friday, as you guys know, April 15th, Femme Friday, and we have Hannah Ferris on. Hannah is a multimedia journalist based out of Chicago, reporting acts across the U.S. I cannot read right now. Reporting across the U.S. She's been featured in these Times, Hyde Park Herald, and has a piece out right now in these Times about the Starbucks workers. Starbucks workers are facing down one of the most intense union busting campaigns in decades. You guys have been following it, I'm sure, starting in my hometown of Buffalo, New York. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
So I think folks have been watching as now more than 100 Starbucks stores, as you mentioned, in 27 states, and that's as of March 21st. I'm sure there's more at this point, that they have launched campaigns to unionize. Before we get to like the anti-union effort, a lot of folks have talked about the secret sauce of Starbucks, why Starbucks has been able to just multiply. I mean, Amazon workers are now doing this too, but and so many other workers. But is it just like seeing the success of one store that makes it multiply, or is there something about the conditions of having these small stores with a few workers, younger, Starbucks likes to pretend that they're this progressive company. I don't know. I mean, what is it, in your opinion, that makes them so special?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a combination of things, right? And as sort of an update, we published the story early March, went online mid-March, and at about that time, I think the article says 120 some odd stores have filed. A month later, less than a month later, over 220 have filed. So it's almost double.
How many stores are there entirely?
I want to say there's over 220, including the stores that have won elections, as well as the two that have lost elections.
Like how many stores, Starbucks-wise, in the U.S.? Do we have any sense?
There's about 9,000. So there's still
get moving, guys, moving.
Right, but I mean, if it's doubling month to month.
I'm just kidding.
I can't do that math, but it's spreading, which is nuts. But in terms of what the secret sauce is, in large degree, that's something I think organizers are still trying to figure out. Like for this piece, I talked with organizers at Workers United, which is an affiliate of SEIU, that Starbucks Workers United, that campaign stems from. Talk to organizers there, talk to folks with the AFL-CIO, labor historians, and partly because it's so new, people are still trying to figure out exactly what it is, because we want to know how to replicate that, right? At other stores, at franchises. But part of it obviously comes from the fact that workers are fed up. Minimum wage workers have been struggling for years, especially in light of the pandemic, right? People are putting their lives on the line for, in some places, $7 an hour, right? So, it's the combination of that, the combination of feeling like this place they have given a lot of their lives to, that they have made their career, that they really do love, does not care for them, does not see them as an equal, and is oftentimes forcing them into situations where they have to take care of each other. So a lot of the organizing has come so naturally for workers at these stores, because they've been taking care of each other. They've been stepping up and advocating for themselves for months, if not years, right? So that's a huge part of it, as well as, in conversations with workers that we talked to for this story, so many of them did cite seeing that initial win, right, at Buffalo in December as a sort of motivating force to finally file, right? They had been talking about it, had been whispering about it, after sort of realizing that it even was a possibility, right? But yeah, all eyes were sort of on that first vote count. And then, as soon as that happened, within the months of December and January, I forget the exact number, but it just exploded, right? Both in terms of stores that filed, as well as partners that were reaching out to Starbucks Workers United, which is run, as I said, by Workers United, and partners from the Buffalo stores, and kind of more broadly, partners nationally. So, it comes from seeing that win, and also there being this network that's built up, locally and nationally, where stores that are unionizing in towns like Chicago are getting reached out to by other stores interested in unionizing in Chicago, right? They're sharing resources, they're connecting each other with, the Workers United local affiliates. So all that is to say, I don't quite know how to sum it up into like a nice, 3-step.
No, there's no like, I mean, if there was, it would be, everybody would have won at this point. I mean, there's also a million other dynamics. Like, are you in a right to work state? Are you in a town that has, more union legacy? I grew up in Buffalo. A lot of union workers lost their jobs because of policies, like labor policies out of the late 70s, all the way up to, of course, NAFTA. So they're folks who came from union families. It wasn't foreign, but also like, you recognize the power of it and the dynamics of when labor is under attack. Same thing with Staten Island. I mean, and like you go to a place like, I don't know, Arizona, where it's like right to work. I think there's a lot of factors here that maybe 20, 30 years from now we'll see, just like we see the effects of really bad labor policies from 30, 40 years ago. Yeah. With that being said, holy crap, the union busting that's happening. So in general, there's like a union busting playbook. is this like the normal playbook? And are they going outside of their normal tactics? And also, like, how does the playbook differ based on if it's a right to work state or if it's a labor state? Like, are there differences at all?
Mm-hmm. So, as far as the playbook, it seems to be, quite standard, right, in terms of what they're doing. The big things being, forcing workers to go through an NLRB election, right, is the first step in a union busting playbook, right? Knowing that process.
Wait, why is that? I'm sorry to stop you. Why forcing them to go through the NLRB, which seems like it should be okay, as opposed to what?
So as opposed to like voluntarily recognizing the union and bargaining in good faith.
Got it.
Yeah, a lot of kind of folks I talked to, a lot of labor historians pointed to that. Primarily because if you look at something like a card check, right, where workers are signing union cards, you'd think if 80-90% of workers signed cards, signed the petition saying they wanted to unionize, that should be proof enough to bargain in good faith, right, to recognize that yes, there is overwhelming support for the union. But forcing workers to then go through an election, which on its face should be democratic, but really is just a sort of way to delay a union coming in, right? Like most of the, every Chicago store, for example, that is most filing in January, still have not gotten an election date yet, right? So wow. It really just, it's nuts.
Is that because NLRB is not like fully funded? Like, are they backed up because there are so many new unions popping up or efforts popping up?
Yeah, it seems like as long, in terms of the actual structure of the NLRB, I don't know how much I can say, but the reporting I've seen seems to say that, they've been really just not, they've been underfunded for, years and years. And while like the general counsel seems to, really be going hard for workers, they just are so at their limit. So it's a mix of that and a mix of, Starbucks, as it's been reported through these NLRB hearings leading up to an election date, is really doing everything it can to try to delay or sort of dilute the vote, right? One of their big tactics that delayed votes in Mesa and Buffalo, for example, was to try to get the ballots impounded, making an argument before the NLRB that, no, we shouldn't be able to do elections on a store-by-store basis. Every store in a district should vote, right? Like obviously trying to just bring in as many people as they can, stores that haven't organized, trying to, just wash those votes with no votes. And every single attempt they've made to do that, they have lost the case on, but they continue doing it, seemingly because it does just delay the vote. The longer people go without a vote, the more time corporate has to pull employees into one-on-one meetings, to send out letters, detailing the facts about the union, right, et cetera. So all that is to say, this isn't to disparage the NLRB, but just the way the process is going, it's not good for workers. And another example being the Memphis workers, which had a very, very public campaign, especially in which 7 were fired, presumably for, or as it's been reported, for union organizing. They also have not received their election date. 7 workers are still out of a job. They've had to have money raised for them via GoFundMe. And they're not giving up. They're some of the sort of strongest people that I've seen, but no one should have to, walk through a minefield to just get to a union election, let alone get a union. Sorry, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, definitely is. And then how is it escalated after that? Like once they're organizing, in the store, for instance, what are the tactics they're using for union busting?
Yeah, so some of the big tactics beyond just delaying the vote are, one of the first things that I would hear of happen that workers would tell me about is within days or a week of filing for election, releasing that letter, a bunch of managers that they have never seen or maybe rarely seen
Right.
would just start appearing in the store, right? Regional managers, district managers. One worker I talked to that I think had been working at their Starbucks for 7 years, was seeing managers for the first time, right? Who had presumably been with the company for a decade. So these managers would show up. In some cases, they would try to, have build a rapport with employees, try to become friends with them, ask, what it is that they could be doing better, trying to put on this sort of friendly face. We're here to help. We're here to enhance the partner experience. In other cases, some would just, per what employees told me, some would just sit in the lobby all day at a table facing the counter, just watching people. And the common thread I heard, we talked to, over a dozen baristas, across the country. The most common thing I heard is that everyone felt like they were being, like they were under surveillance, right? So that is usually the first tactic. What ends up happening shortly after that is these managers start hosting what they call listening sessions, right? To hear employee grievances, try to make the workplace better, and then ultimately, share facts about the union, as they call it. In these cases, it's either been, one-on-one, manager pulls an employee onto the floor, often during the workday, in some cases in the middle of a very busy workday. In some cases, or in this one case, this worker, Eugene, told me about, management were pulling staff off the floor during some of the busiest times of the day, rush hours, right? Pulling them into these meetings where, while they wouldn't explicitly say this, they would essentially imply, nothing is guaranteed in a union contract. These benefits that you rely on, these wages that you feed your family with, they could be gone, you could lose your health care, you could lose your college tuition, which are things that Starbucks offers. Basically implying that to employees, pulling them off the floor at one of the busiest times of the day, just causing them so much distress from those conversations alone, from the intimidation, that they had to take off for the rest of the day or lunch and just cry, because it was just overwhelming. And it's also, it's a workspace. It's interesting in that it's a small cafe, right? So beyond just the surveillance that workers would talk about, where management would watch them at the counter, they have very little private space. They have very little space to actually take a break, talk about what's been going on, and actually organize. So they are just constantly, between just the stress of the job itself and the undue burden distress management is putting on them, they really have no escape and are just having to deal with this day in and day out. So that's one tactic, as well as these things called captive audience meetings, which are similar, but it's, all staff essentially pulled into a meeting with management. And we've heard stories about this. Happened in Chicago, actually, in February, stories where, the store closed for an hour or two. All of the sort of regional management was there. You had managers crying. They talked about, what a big family they were. You don't want to sort of union this big bad third party coming in and, ruining the familial relationship they have. And, this is a store where workers were routinely getting death threats from customers, and management previously had been blowing them off. So yeah, it's just, that alone is just, a lot of stress. And then kind of beyond that, as far as union busting, there's obviously retaliation, right, which is illegal, but happens. And there's no, I don't think I've seen the most recent reporting on this, but one worker that I talked to had been kind of keeping a total of partners nationally that have pretty credible cases to being fired, for unionizing or for, being very active in their store's campaign. And it's over 20. And this obviously includes the Memphis 7. But yeah, it's creating, ultimately a culture of fear among workers, between telling them, hey, you might lose everything if you go forward with this, you'll have to pay dues, you'll lose your autonomy. And, this fear, I might lose my job for this ultimately. That's kind of the gist of what workers are facing. And, there are a lot of little things too, like workers getting texts from the emergency line on Starbucks that are telling them to vote no, if ballots went out, right? Flyers going up in store. Starbucks put out a website that kind of spread a lot of its union facts. The whole gamut of things, there's very...
And Howard Schultz, of course, also putting his foot in his mouth every 5 seconds, thinking that he's like, that's what's so amazing is like the board of Starbucks thinks, oh, this is the guy who has put his foot in his mouth quite a few times and being completely disconnected. The guy who ran for president, he thinks that, the board is like, that's who is going to speak to these workers. And he's messed up multiple times and they still are like, nope, we're gonna keep him.
Yeah, you would think after he invoked the Holocaust in his speech to workers, that would be enough to go, oh, maybe this guy isn't like the best orator, but no, yeah, he's there. But yeah, I did kind of hear from workers that they were getting a kick out of now being able to address their letters, when they filed to Howard Schultz directly.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that was.
Well, I mean, and just before we wrap, there is this aspect of it that's so fascinating, which is like people don't have an option. Like, oh, if you unionize, you're going to pay dues, and like we might fire you. And I think what's happening, correct me if I'm wrong, like having talked to Starbucks workers and organizers, they don't care. They're like, we want to do this because it's not enough and we're not surviving. And so the alternative is we still aren't surviving. And I just find it really amazing. And maybe there's something about like the younger members of the Starbucks workforce who just don't know an alternate universe where like there's vibrant. I don't know. I mean, it's maybe that's the leadership not understanding like just how bad it is on the ground. The conditions are for folks that they're willing to take these risks to have a successful union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly seems to be a disconnect because with workers that I've talked to, in most cases, and there are, some cases where the union busting has kind of thwarted efforts. I think most recently there was an election yesterday in Virginia where the union lost and, is very much attributing it to the massive union busting campaign. But for the most part, all of the threats, all of the harassment workers are saying is only adding fuel to the fire, right? It's how can a company, try to use this rhetoric of, oh, we're your family, but we're also threatening to, ruin your life, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's, with Memphis, for example, I think we talk about this in the article, but 7 people were fired, and yet you had remaining workers in the store come out and join the picket every single day, come back harder with wanting to organize, right? And to my understanding, that is still going, that spirit is still going. And, it's fortunate that it also comes at a time, in the last few years where public support for unions has really grown, right? Especially in the last year.
Right.
And especially among young people, which is something I never expected would happen. I always hoped would. But it's just really exciting to see. And as workers and organizers told me, the thing that, people believe will, keep the fire kind of going within workers and put pressure on Starbucks to stop union busting is public support and public attention, doing as much as you can in your town, community, wherever Starbucks is unionizing to support those workers.
So go, if you do live in a town where there's Starbucks and you do go to Starbucks, just show your support. Send them a little note, like at the cash register. When they ask you for your name, be like supporting a union or whatever,
Union strong. Give them a big tip. They really like to.
Exactly. All right. Well, I'm very grateful to you. Thank you for writing about this and keeping us, informed. 200 plus union efforts around the country. Only 8,000 750 to go. We can do it, but it's exponential. I mean, like you said, it's doubling every month. So this is at this rate, and there's a point where they just can't bust that many at once. So, Workers United, you know the line. Hannah Ferris, thank you so much. Go check out. It's from March, but it's still relevant. Super interesting. We'll just keep covering this because we've been doing it since the beginning. So thank you very much, Hannah. We are really grateful to have a great community on Patreon who loves and appreciates the work that we're doing, the guests that we have on the show, and we love them right back. If you are not already a patron, please join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. You can also get some swag, some merch on there as well. We're also doing a big Q&A right now. Patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And if you're not already, please subscribe. Every single podcast platform out there we are on now. Of healthcare in America. I got it right here. That just discusses just that. Genevieve Grabman is the author of Challenging Pregnancy. She's also a policy and communications lead at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and previously served as director of government relations for Physicians for Reproductive Health. Also an attorney and has worked for the WHO and the Pan American Health Organization. Genevieve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. How is my sound? Are you able to hear me?
You sound great. Yes.
Fantastic. Perfect. Because I'm doing what every mom does. I'm multitasking.
From my
minivan.
From your minivan. I love it.
Absolutely. But
so I want, go ahead.
I was going to say, you are so right that both medical professionals and, more importantly, politicians who try to act as medical professionals without any medical background or knowledge are ignoring more than half of our population, that portion of the population that could fall pregnant. And I'm so concerned about this, and I'm so concerned about it right now as the Supreme Court is poised to overturn Roe v. Wade, which is why my publisher and I timed my book to come out now, as the court is considering what to do about abortion in this country, so that we can have a conversation and to ask ourselves, what do we, the people, really want for ourselves and for the health of our people?
It's so interesting because there's a lot of layers to this, right? And what I really appreciate about this book, which stems out of your story, which I'm going to ask you about in a second, is that when you have policies like this, it's not just about abortion, although it is very much about abortion. It's also about just the institutions, the medical, institutions, whether it's, in politics and actual decision making, and whether a woman has any sort of authority over her own body in many ways. But it's also about like funding, how much money is put into women's health. I have my own personal story from this last year. I've told our audience before, those who haven't heard it. I went to go get my eggs frozen last summer in Greece. My family's from Greece. Much, much cheaper. They do a wonderful job. I went to go get my eggs frozen at 37, and they retrieved 3 viable eggs, which is extremely, extremely low for a woman, a healthy woman in her late 30s. And I said to the doctor, a man, and also very religious. That's something that we're not really, they don't openly do that, at least here in our, you don't have like crosses and icons in your health facility. Well, yeah, you're right. So I said to the doctor, I said, as I've done to every single doctor since I was 16 years old, do I have endometriosis? And he looked at me and said, oh yeah. And I said, I'm sorry, what? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I don't understand. For at least twice a year since I was 16 years old, I have been asking my doctor if I have endometriosis based on the excruciating menstrual cramps I've had since I was 16, some of which people have called ambulance on me for, and I've dealt with it over the years on my own. And he said, oh, I can measure it through your blood. There's a new way of detecting it in Greece. And I walked away from that and I thought, clearly these things are linked. And he said it so passively. And then I just went through a wave of emotions of anger and frustration and thinking about our medical system and why is it that I was challenged. And then when I came back to my OBGYN here and I told him the story, he scoffed at me. And he's no longer my OBGYN. Anyways, you read these stories now, and I'm so happy that they're finally coming out. Just how women have to literally like do research, keep asking, go to different doctors. It was 21 years until I got diagnosed. And if I had known that in my early 30s, maybe I would have frozen my eggs and had a very different situation. We don't know for sure. But this is not an uncommon story. You have a story that you start off your book with and led you down this path. So I'm very curious. How did this all happen?
So, I mean, I'm very interested in your story, and I want to riff off on some of the parts of it, because my story is, just in brief, I got pregnant with identical twins. Those identical twins' blood vessels fused across the amniotic sacs in a condition called twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. And in addition, the pregnancy was complicated by other conditions, both kind of humorous, like maybe a parasitic triplet, and not so funny, such as selective intrauterine growth restriction, SIGR, and TTTS, the twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, and SIGR are both incredibly fatal conditions for the fetuses that suffer from them. And TTTS can be fatal for the pregnant person carrying the pregnancy. Because what happens with that condition is that one twin produces almost no amniotic fluid and pumps all its blood away to the recipient twin, who, because that twin is receiving so much blood, produces a ton of amniotic fluid. And that causes all sorts of terrible repercussions for that fetus as it tries to develop, and also for the person carrying the pregnancy. Right. So much pressure from all that amniotic fluid. So that's what happened to me. But then here's where I want to riff off of your story. I went and tried to get help, right? So that's what we do. We go and we show up at doctors' offices and we say, help us, please, right? Mm-hmm. The doctors say something might not be right. And then what do we do about it? And that's where I ran, smack on into the walls of politics, but also religion. Kind of like what you said. You said in Greece that it's open if a physician holds a particular religious viewpoint, but it's also very open in the United States, especially in rural areas where the Catholic Church now has consolidated and controls most hospitalized care. And that means that the Catholic Church controls what obstetrical care and what surgical care is available to those who are having complicated pregnancies. Which means that the care that a person receives, even if that person is not Catholic, is determined by the dogma of the Catholic Church. And that was part of my story, because skipping ahead a couple of steps, I ultimately got discharged from secular hospitals and had to go to what was left for me was a Catholic hospital to provide me care. And it wasn't that I had sought the Catholic hospital out, mind you, I sought a doctor out, like the best doctor around in maternal fetal medicine, but his office happened to be located in the hospital compound of a Catholic hospital, which meant that those dogmatic restrictions applied to him, who was not Catholic, and to me, who is Catholic, but did not want those restrictions to apply to me. I wanted medicine and science to determine the outcome of my pregnancy and my health and my fate. But ultimately, what determined what I could and couldn't do were politics that permit the intrusion of religion into medicine, especially medicine that as it affects reproductive health, women's health, and maternal health. And in addition, in the end, I had to rely on my luck and, frankly, my privilege to come through that pregnancy alive and with my twins. And it should not be in the United States in 2022 that we are asking women to rely on their luck, and that we are privileging those people who are white and relatively wealthy and who have education for having good outcomes of their pregnancy, and condemning all those who are not those categories to having poor outcomes. That is not what I believe our people want for ourselves in the United States and in 2022.
I mean, what's just so bizarre about this, excuse me, is it's very clear that whether it's, these ectopic pregnancies being banned in Missouri, I mean, it's very clear that this isn't even, it's not about the baby, clearly. And if they want, if there's some sort of religious aspect to this, let's just give them that for a second. If there's some sort of religious aspect in terms of wanting to see a pregnancy carried out, fine. But to attack women's health as a whole, it's bad for society. It's bad for the mother's health. It's bad for the family. I mean, let's like use their terms. I don't really get at that point, like, why? Other than just, it's, I know it sounds bizarre and this is what your book's about, but at the end of the day, I just don't understand. Like, if you're a white man who doesn't want a woman to have autonomy over their body, that's one thing. It's another thing to basically make it so it's unhealthy. I mean, if you're a white man who wants to have children, like, you need to have a viable, healthy mother in the most brutal way.
That is the message I'm trying to get out. That's the message, because I think when we think of abortion, right, we see this as a question. The anti-abortion crowd has been very, very effective. There's me looking slightly better.
You look great.
The anti-abortion crowd has been very, very effective in framing this as the woman's life or choices against the baby's life. And that's been effective because you can say, you know, people like babies. Like, why would you not choose the baby in that situation? But what I'm trying to point out is that I was choosing the baby. I wanted this pregnancy.
That's right.
I wanted to come out of the pregnancy with, I didn't think I could have 2 kids. So I tried to gamble. I said, just give me one. Just give me one live baby. I realized the other one's going to die. Just give me one. What procedures could you use to save one? And if you can't save one, just save me, because you want to know what I had at home? Another baby that I was nursing, that was sustained by my breast milk.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I like, you know, I was very efficient. I had 3 kids in 2 years. So,
Are you Irish?
yeah, how'd you know? So, yeah, I mean, and so I was trying to save a pregnancy, but you want to know what the flip side of destruction is? Creation. Who saved me was ultimately, when all my hope was lost, when all the doctors had discharged me, who saved me was an abortion doctor, a former abortion doctor, because he told me, with the techniques he knew with the techniques he used and his knowledge that he had to terminate a pregnancy, he used those same techniques and knowledge to save my pregnancy. And what I am trying to say is, when you outlaw training, techniques, words, medicines, and tools, you are outlawing the use of those same things to save wanted pregnancies. And the result of that is you are not going to have people who are being able to bring forth pregnancy and life. I wonder if that's what we really want.
When you talk to politicians who disagree, how have they received, or people in the policy space, I should say, even the anti-abortion policy space, how do they receive this line of thought?
So I used to do a lot of advocacy on Capitol Hill around reproductive rights. And I had a reputation of playing really well with conservatives and Republicans, and conservative Democrats. There are conservatives who are Democrats, and I had you know, a reputation of playing well with everybody. And the reason why is this, because I completely get it. I get the arguments. I get why people feel that their religious beliefs compel them to stamp out abortion, to convince others that abortion is wrong. And they feel compelled, and they feel that their God and their religion is telling them that they have to take over the powers of government and the courts and, you know, the legislature, and outlaw something that they see as an offense to their religion and to their beliefs. But what I'm also, so I understand that. I come from a family background. I come from a religious background, that's the belief in it. But what I'm also trying to point out is that, number one, we do live in a secular society, right? And not everyone, in fact, not the majority, a small minority of Americans hold those beliefs around abortion. The majority of Americans hold different beliefs because they are of different religious backgrounds. And so if we are allowing one religion to dictate its views on reproductive health or in healthcare in general, we are ceding ground and saying that it's acceptable to have a theocracy in the United States. And I don't think that's what we believe as Americans. In addition, those of us who are religious and who are Catholic are not always adherent to all things in our religion at all times. And if we want to bear those penalties religiously, have the church come at us, have the church in its own, in our churches and for our religious leaders, correct us. But that's not the role of our secular government to enforce what is a religious belief or the religious consequences of not following a belief on us. That's the role of those adherents of the religion and those religious leaders of those adherents. So I keep trying to explain that ultimately the question we are facing is one of what is paramount in our society? Is science paramount? Is the health of all of our people, no matter the religion, paramount? Or is it paramount in our society that we construct a theocracy where one religion and one religious view of the minority controls all of us? And I keep begging people, think about when you or someone you love needs any sort of health care. Are you going to allow your doctors and yourself to determine what health care you need? Or are you going to put those decisions in the slow and inflexible and not understanding hands of politicians or of hospital ethical boards that are dominated by nuns and priests who don't understand you, don't understand your needs, and don't understand what your family desires for itself? That's what we're doing. That's the future we're constructing for ourselves if Roe v. Wade falls and we permit state after state to restrict various healthcare techniques. And we know the outcome of what this is going to look like for American society. We need to turn only and look at El Salvador, where there are women in prison for having miscarriages, not abortions, spontaneous miscarriages, because of the suspicion, because they were reported as having had a miscarriage, and they couldn't prove that it was just a miscarriage, that they had done nothing to cause that miscarriage. So into prison they go. There are women who are exploding and dying because of ectopic pregnancies, because it is against the law in El Salvador, as it is proposed to be in Missouri, to intervene in an ectopic pregnancy. And so what does the woman do? She suffers horrendously while the physicians refuse to intervene, and she explodes. And if she does not hemorrhage and die, she is in excruciating pain and often is infected and has other terrible outcomes and is rendered infertile. And I wonder, is that what we want for our society? Do we wish to be the same as El Salvador or different than El Salvador? And the choice is ours.
And, it's interesting you say in El Salvador, when there's a report, I mean, in Texas, there's it's like citizens reporting of citizens arrests of someone who either may have received an abortion or given an abortion. I mean, it's bizarro land. This is not what liberal democracies do, in the classic sense. This is not, especially, I mean, it's so retroactive. It's like, I don't understand how we can argue before the UN that we're a liberal democracy if these are the types of bills that are being passed across the country.
Well, I mean, and this is why I think as much as, I'm a lawyer, I'm a member of the Supreme Court bar, I'm married to a member of the Supreme Court bar who, his entire practice is arguing before the Supreme Court. So obviously, I'm focused on the Supreme Court case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is the case that came out of Mississippi that is examining whether states may allow restrictions on pre-viability abortions. No live baby, no live fetus.
Folks. So explain that a little bit more for folks who may not understand.
So what the Supreme Court is trying to decide, and I was about to say it's kind of a red herring, but what the Supreme Court is about to decide is whether states, each individual state may constitutionally, under the US Constitution, restrict abortion. Currently, Roe v. Wade and then Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which is a case that came after Roe v. Wade, say that states may not restrict pre-viability abortions, and there has to be certain safeguards for the woman's health, and what is at issue in and after the pregnancy is viable, states may put restrictions on it. But what is at issue in Dobbs is before the pregnancy, the fetus is viable, before whether a state may say no, abortion is not permitted. And that is what 25 states are poised to do the second Roe v. Wade falls, because we believe that the Supreme Court will decide that, yes, it is permissible under the US Constitution to prohibit abortion at all stages of the pregnancy, including before the fetus is viable.
Jeez.
And so the states are waiting to jump. But we still have an opportunity. We need to take this fight to our states, to our local jurisdictions, if we believe that this is not the type of dystopia we wish to live in.
Yeah.
And before it is too late, we need to be concentrating very hard on what is going on in our state and in our locality to preserve our access to all types of healthcare, to save ourselves and our wanted pregnancies, and to ensure that doctors can make the best healthcare decisions based on science, whether they're related to pregnancy or to other aspects of maternal health, or whether they're not related to pregnancy or maternal health whatsoever, but related to some other thing. It's not the role of politicians to determine our healthcare. It's the role of the patient and her doctor to determine healthcare.
If Roe v. Wade is overturned, if we have to go down that path state by state, fighting, where do you see just like women's health in general going? I mean, I see kind of two paths. Like there's no more funding maybe, and which affects many, many other issues, or, Planned Parenthood is raising more money than they can even imagine. And I'm curious, like, how does the industry in general, how does research, which is already, limited, how does the actual practice of women's health get affected beyond abortion itself?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, but it's also, again, consider it does not matter what a private organization, how much money it has. If that private organization, Planned Parenthood in this case, in your hypothetical, is prohibited by state law from doing anything in that state. And so again, we're setting up a divided America. We're setting up an America wherein in a few states abortion is going to be permitted, but not just abortion. In a few states, women are going to have to fly or flee when they have a pregnancy like mine and they want fetal surgery to try to save the fetuses, or they want some sort of intervention in an ectopic pregnancy if they live in a state where the Catholic Church has taken over all options for healthcare, or they live in a state where they wish to get a tubal ligation because they can't bear to have their 6th or 7th or 8th child, and they no longer wish to be pregnant all the time. Or they're in a state where they were raped and they're 12 or 13 years old and their hips are too small to bear a pregnancy, and so they wish to terminate that pregnancy. So women are going to be fleeing from states that don't permit abortion in any circumstance, according to the laws and bills that are pending or have been passed in anticipation of Roe falling. And these women are going to be fleeing like internal refugees and migrants to other states that are more permissive and have more science-based healthcare. And again, why are we creating this division amongst our society and in our supposedly secular, democratic America? This is a really, it's not compassionate, but I would also say it's a violation of our democratic ideals, what we are constructing for ourselves. And I keep begging my readers, and I keep begging anyone who's listening to me, so your listeners, to think about this and to intervene locally and with their state politicians before it is too late, because you could very well wind up like me with a wanted pregnancy, but no practical way to save it.
Absolutely. I mean, when this Missouri bill came forward, I thought of my mother when I had this. I think my first memory, honestly, was I was around 2 or 3 years old. If I don't know if your memories, if you can even have memories then, but I do for whatever reason. You can. I'm sitting next to my mother in a hospital bed. And I remember because of the ice cream cone, because I was that age, I had an ice cream cone with sprinkles. And I was next to my mother's hospital bed. And years later, I learned it was because my mother had an ectopic pregnancy. And she was getting ready to board an airplane with my father to go to San Francisco or something. And she wasn't feeling well in the car. And my dad, I don't know if he would do this today, but my dad was worried about her and took her straight to the hospital. And the doctor said, if you had boarded that plane, you would have died on the plane. But if you had waited a day, you would have died.
Yeah.
And so I think about people who do not have resources, and there will be refugees, but imagine you're unable to leave, you don't have the resources,
and most people don't have those resources, right?
Exactly.
So we know, just other research that's come out lately, due to the pandemic, what did we learn so much about our fellow Americans? And we found out that the average American does not even have $400 in savings to respond to a medical emergency, not even $400.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you know how much it's going to cost to board an airplane, get a babysitter for your kids, go get a hotel, and then pay for an abortion? Because, by the way, if an abortion is illegal, they're also going to make insurance coverage of abortion illegal.
That's right.
So all that's going to have to come out of people's pockets. And again, we're creating a society where those with privilege and with wealth are prioritized, and everybody else is thrown under the bus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, that is not what we stand for in America. That is not why our nation was constructed. It was constructed as a nation of opportunity for all people, no matter their background and no matter their prior economic circumstance. So I wonder why it is that we are allowing this to occur in our country, and why we've allowed ourselves to be really deceived by this narrative that it is a child's life versus just, a woman's capricious wishes, when in fact it is the pregnant person's life at risk, our democratic ideals at risk, and the question of whether we're allowing the wholesale takeover of our healthcare by a single religion.
Yep. Dark days. Well, this is a must-read book. It's a quick book for folks who want a good weekend read. You can check it out right now. We have it up on University of Iowa Press. Of course, you can go straight to the publisher or anywhere else to buy books. But it's a fascinating conversation. I urge more men to read these books too, to understand. We have Fridays on our show is called Femme Fridays for a reason. A good chunk of YouTube politics is viewed by men. So, it's important, and our show does very well on Fridays. So we really, really are grateful that you've come on to talk about this, and please, keep us in the loop. We'd love to talk with you more. If there are any developments, you've been able to break it down very simply for us, given the complexities of the law. So we really appreciate it.
I would love to come back and talk with you once the court rules. I think we're all on tenterhooks to find out what that ruling is, and then what does it mean for us.
Exactly.
So I look
Thank
forward
you very
to
much
for the conversation. Thank you.
Genevieve Grabman, go check out Challenging Pregnancy, a journey through the politics and science of healthcare in America.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.